Okay, good afternoon. It is April 23rd. It is approximately 2 p.m. I am preparing to do the 8th grade language arts for the afternoon. So today we're going to do a couple of things. One thing, similar to what we typically do, I'm going to go over the next chapter, which is chapter 19. I'm also going to go over the graphic organizer that you are going to be working on for this assignment. There's also a quiz, which I will go over briefly if I have time. Before we get to that, I want to go to Google Classrooms and just show you an activity I put up here last week. So what you are going to do is go into Google Classroom, go to the Speed Read Challenge, click on that. It will bring up a fluency packet. What I want you to do is pick. Hi, welcome. So I was just going over the assignment. So welcome, and I'll start over. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to Google Classrooms when you get a chance. I want you to click on Speed Read Challenge, click on Fluency Packet, and it will bring up something that looks like this. It has a list of short one-page stories from 6th to 8th grade. So some of them are a little bit easier than others. Welcome, Elijah. Uh, so what you're going to do when you get here is you're going to pick any one of these stories you want. They're all basically a page and a half or one page. Pick whichever story you think is the most interesting. There's a list of like 40. Read that story out loud and then record how fast that you're able to read that story on this template right here. So say you read the Muhammad Ali packet, write down Muhammad Ali for this, the reading passage, and then how long it took you to read it. So 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. Then I want you to read the passage in your head or listen to it, and you can listen to it if you click the blue link or purple link beside it. It'll read it out loud to you if there were any words you didn't understand. Then I want you to read it again and put your time for your second reading, and then wait a day, wait 2 days, wait a couple hours, whatever. Read it one more time and then record that. And then there are 6 weeks on the graphic organizer, so you pick 6 of those 40 stories and you're due 1 story a week. Okay, so that is on Google Classrooms. If you have any questions with that, feel free to type them in. Or if you're not here and you're watching us later, feel free to send me a message on Google Classrooms or an email. Elijah, since you're here, I'm about to go over chapter 19. Have you read up to chapter 19 in To Kill a Mockingbird by chance? Are you caught up? I know there's a delay from what I say to when you see it. So, hey, Malachi, welcome. And I think, Malachi, you were here last time, so I think you heard the instructions for the speed read, the fluency packet. So, fix that camera a little bit. So you can, do that at your convenience. So, I'm going to go over chapter 19. When you go to Google Classrooms, if you go to the main page, you'll notice I put a video for chapter 19, and that's basically the entire chapter in movie form. So it's the old black and white movie, but it covers this chapter pretty well. So if you want a good visual of this chapter, you can watch that. There's also a video for last chapter, chapter 18, which is Mayella Yule when she's giving her testimony, and it follows the book pretty closely. If you just watch the videos, you would miss some of Scout's commentary. So, like some of what Scout says, some of what Jem says, you would miss some of that, but you would get a pretty good representation of the chapters if you watch those videos. So, today what we're going to do is I'm just going to go over chapter 19 with you. So, chapter 19 is when Tom Robinson gets up on trial and he gives his testimony. So, chapter 18 was all about Mayella giving her testimony. The chapter before that, chapter 17, was the sheriff and the father. The father was like a witness who supposedly saw the end of the attack, and the sheriff was there in the aftermath. He didn't actually see anything. He just took Mayella's account and Mr. Yule's account, and then he was there for the aftermath, so that's why he was one of the witnesses. There are only 4 witnesses total in the entire trial: the sheriff, Mr. Yule, Mayella, the daughter, who is the victim, and Tom, who is the defendant. So it's a pretty short trial. Tom basically is called to the stand, and a real quick description of Tom: he's 25, he's married with 3 children, he was convicted once for getting in a fight. He tried to elaborate on that when Atticus is introducing him and trying to like explain to everybody who he is. He was convicted. Someone tried to stab him, and he just kind of defended himself, but he ended up going to jail for I think a month or something due to that. And he works for Mr. Link Dees at his farm. Link Dees you're going to meet in a little bit, and he's kind of important because he has an outburst during the trial. But also, if you remember way back, which I think you would have still been in class when we read this part, Elijah, so you probably remember it. When they were in the church, when they went to go visit Calpurnia's church, they mentioned the only person who would give Tom Robinson's wife a job was Link Dees. So Link Dees is kind of like sympathetic towards Tom and his family. So he's like one of the only white people in town who will still give Tom's wife a job because he's trying to help her out. And during the testimony, you find out that Link actually respects Tom, which is kind of in contrast to how Tom's being treated by pretty much everybody else. So, Tom's testimony. Tom mentions that he lives past the dump, which is where the Yules live. So he has to walk by every day to get to work. He mentions that Mayella looks like she's always doing a lot of like chores, like heavy stuff that you would expect a male to do. So in the past, she has asked him to do work, and he's always done it for free, and he's never taken payment. So like she's offered payment before, and he's just refused it. And it's always something short, like pick a bucket. Yeah, we were outside for that. Like she'll ask him to take a bucket down to the stream and bring some water up, or she'll ask him to break a dresser for kindling, like firewood. But it's always something relatively short that he can do pretty quickly, and it's something that he just does because she's like a woman and he doesn't think that anyone's helping her out, so he helps her out, like just being a good guy. On the day in question, Mayella said that she asked him to tear a chifforobe up, which is like a dresser. She wanted him to break it for her outside, and she went inside to get money. Tom's account of the events differs. He says that she asked him to come inside and move a dresser. He really didn't want to go inside the house, but there were normally a lot of children running around, like there were 6 to 9 kids normally, so he thought it would be okay because there would be a lot of witnesses. So he went inside and he was just going to move this dresser and be on his way. Once he got inside, though, he realized that there were no children around. Mayella told him that it was because she saved up money and sent them to get ice cream, so they were all alone. The father's disappeared into the swamp like he normally does to go hunting and drinking, so they were completely alone. At this point, Mayella hugs Tom and tries to kiss him. So remember, this is back in segregation times, the 1930s. And remember before too, we read the story, we learned about what had happened to that one young African American who had went down to Mississippi, and all he had said was he called like a white woman babe, and he got beaten to death for it. So like this is that same time period like that happened. So when Mayella gives him a hug and tries to kiss him, Tom's actually afraid because he realizes if someone catches him hugging and kissing this white woman, he's going to get killed. So he really just wants to run away, but he's afraid to push her because if he physically hurts a white woman, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. So he's kind of in this no-win situation. He can't push her off of him because if he hurts her, he's going to get killed. And if he kisses her, he's going to get killed. So he's kind of in like a no-win situation. As he's trying to figure out what to do, Mr. Yule happens to show up. He sees what's going on through the window. He starts screaming. Tom is able to break free from Mayella at this point because she's distracted by her father, and he just sprints out of there. He explains to Atticus, well, he's black, and he knows, like, he's in a lot of trouble, like, no one's going to believe his side of the story, so he just ran because he didn't know what to do. After that, Link D's, his boss, interrupts. So Link kind of stands up in the middle of the courtroom, around everyone who's paying attention, and he says, "Hey, Tom Robinson is a very respectable man. He has never given me any trouble at work. He works really hard. He's a good guy." The judge kind of yells at Link D's, orders him to leave the courtroom, and he kind of gives the suggestion that he's upset because he doesn't want there to be a mistrial, like he doesn't want to have to do the trial over again. Atticus kind of mentions that he thinks it will be okay and they can continue. Now, Link doing this is actually pretty brave because, again, most of the white people there expect Tom to be found guilty. A lot of them are upset that Atticus is trying to win. So they're not mad that Atticus is defending him because that's his job, but they're upset that Atticus is trying to actually win this case. They kind of just think because it's a white person versus a black person, the black person should just be convicted, no questions asked. The fact that Atticus is trying to defend him is a problem, and then the fact that Link D's just stands up and kind of sticks up for Tom, that's looked down upon. So he has to leave the courtroom. The judge is upset with him. The judge strickens his comments from the record so it won't show up if someone looks back at the court transcript. There's a few ways you can interpret Link's attempt to stand up for Tom. Some people say it's like out of bravery. It also looks kind of desperate. It's almost like how Jem and Scout are watching the trial and they're sure that Atticus is going to win because they already saw that Tom's left arm has been brutally like mangled in a machine, and there's no way he could have used his left arm to beat Mayella, which is what all the bruises would suggest a left-handed person did it. We also know Mr. Yule is left-handed, so like the implication there is that Mayella was beaten by her father and probably abused in other ways too. But Mayella didn't admit to the fact that Tom didn't hurt her. It's still kind of her word against his, even though the evidence is slanted much more towards Tom's side. Link, being an adult, can see that the trial isn't going Tom's way. So he's concerned that Tom might be convicted, and if he's convicted, there's a good chance he'll be executed. So he's kind of like desperate and tries to interrupt the court just as like this like plea for people to like, treat Tom fairly, which he thinks isn't going to happen. Excuse me. Okay, so after Atticus is done, then Mr. Gilmer, the prosecutor, he gets to question Tom. So the big thing that comes out here is Mr. Gilmer wants to know why Tom would do these chores for Mayella if he wasn't getting anything out of it. She wasn't paying him. Like maybe he was sweet on her. Like maybe he had a crush on her, so he was just doing these chores to get closer to her. Tom has to explain himself. At first he tries just to like brush the questions off, but when he's finally like cornered with like, well, why are you doing this? He admits that he felt sorry for her. And, she was by herself, like she was raising all these kids. Her father didn't help her. He was always drunk. So he felt bad for her, which makes sense that most people would kind of feel bad for Mayella. But the idea that a black person in the 1930s felt bad for a white person in this like segregated society where like even though the Yules were not respected, they were incredibly poor, they were seen beneath most of the other people in Maycomb, they were still considered to be way above the African American population. So when this African American man says he felt bad for this white woman, that's kind of like insulting to everyone in the courtroom. And Mr. Gilmer tries to like really exaggerate this point, making sure that everyone on the jury and everyone in the courtroom knows that Tom thinks he's better than the white population thinks that he is. Also, during the questioning, Gilmer's style of questioning is very aggressive. If you remember the previous chapter, Atticus called Mayella Miss and Ma'am. Even though she thought he was making fun of her, he was actually being extremely polite towards her. He was polite to Mr. Yule. He was polite to the sheriff. Mr. Gilmer is not polite to Tom at all. He calls him boy. He insults him. He makes a big event out of the fact that Tom felt sorry for her. Like, you felt sorry for her. Like, how dare you? So Gilmer never even broaches the subject of the fact that Tom couldn't have possibly committed the crime. The fact that like Tom's arm isn't functional. He also kind of hammers on the fact that Tom won't say Mayella lied. So their stories don't line up. It's not possible. They're both telling the truth. So Gilmer actually asks him point blank, like, well, is she lying? And Tom knows he won't survive if he says that this white woman was lying. So he has to say, she's just confused, right? Like she doesn't remember things right in her mind because he knows if he says that this white person's lying, he'll be killed for it. So Tom's in a very like difficult position. He can't exactly say the truth or he'll get killed, but he has to kind of say the truth because if he gets convicted, he'll get killed. So he's in a very dangerous position, which is one of the reasons he ran away. He even mentions to Mr. Gilmer that he ran away because he was so afraid of something like this happening, of him being stuck in trial in front of all these white people trying to defend himself, and the belief that there's no way he can get out of this. Dill sees all this going on. Dill's sitting with Scout and Jem on the balcony with the African American population, and Dill just starts crying. There were a few points in the trial where the Reverend Sykes tries to convince Jem to take Scout and Dill away because he was afraid that this was too much for them. Dill begins crying so loudly that he eventually does have to get Scout to take him outside. We find out Dill's crying because he's so upset with the way that Tom's being treated. Like he can't put it into words. He can't quite explain like why he's so upset, but he knows that like Gilmer was just being mean towards Tom, and he doesn't quite grasp the whole like segregation, the ingrained racism, and it's just too much for him. If you remember earlier in the year, we talked about how Dill represents like childhood and innocence. So like when that childhood and innocence comes against something so vile and evil as this innocent guy who's probably going to be killed, he just can't handle it. So he responds by crying and he has to leave. He tries to explain this to Scout, but Scout just suggests that Tom is just a Negro. So she uses the polite word for the time period. She doesn't say the N word. She says Negro instead. But she's still echoing the townspeople's sentiment that black people are far worse than white people. So he's just saying he's just the black guy, which echoes the sentiment that everyone in town kind of believes. This also shows that Atticus, his attempt to shield her from racism, hasn't worked completely because she's saying something that you get the feeling Atticus would disagree with. The idea that Tom is just the black guy. Tom, you would assume Atticus would look at Tom as a person, not as like a color, just because of the way Atticus is. And the fact that Scout has bought more into the way the townspeople view things versus how her dad views things, he would probably consider this that he had partially failed in his attempt to shield her from racism. The chapter ends with Dolphus Raymond introducing himself. We had talked about him before. He's the white man who's from a rich family who has some mixed children with an African American woman, and he's always drunk. Or, according to townspeople, he's always drunk. Jim already explained that he's just pretending to be drunk, and he's going to introduce himself and talk to Dill in the next chapter, but we'll get to that next time. This chapter is pretty short. Some of the important themes to go over were the idea about how we should respond to injustice. It's pretty clear that Tom couldn't have committed this crime. The crime probably the trial should never have happened. The sheriff knew he couldn't have done what he was accused of doing because of his arm. The judge realizes he couldn't have done it. Everyone on the jury realizes that he couldn't have done it. But it looks like they're still going to make him go through the motions of the trial. And Link D's response to this is to speak out. It's like he can't handle this level of injustice, so he has to speak out. Atticus' response to the injustice is to try to defend Tom, and Miss Maudie, the neighbor, she just refuses to go to the trial because she doesn't think she can change anything. So her way of protesting is just not to be a part of it. So you have these different ways of dealing with the injustice. The other big theme here is the loss of innocence. You can see that most clearly in Dill, but you can kind of see it in Scout because the idea that Scout is viewing Tom the same way that the racist population is viewing him. That kind of shows that she's lost her innocence, and Dill crying because he can't put into words um, how awful this situation is that he's a witness to. And then the last thing to keep you with here is Mayella a victim? She has this horrible life. She's almost definitely been abused in physical and probably sexual ways by her father. Um, she, hey, good afternoon. She lives this miserable, bleak life. She's not really in control of her situation, but she's willing to hurt Tom, right? So, is she a victim? Is she a monster? Is she a villain? Is she an antagonist? Like, what exactly? How would you classify her? And then the last important uh, thing to go over is, despite Tom being very important to the story, he's really little more than a symbol. Like, they never really get into his character. You know that he's married. You know that his arm was badly damaged. You know that his boss thinks he's a good guy, but you don't really get a lot of his personality, a lot of his motivations and fear, other than the fact that he's really scared. He doesn't want to be there, and he's afraid. Welcome, Brianna. I saw that you came on. So basically, I just went over chapter 19. It's a pretty short chapter. If you go to the website, you can watch the video of this. If you click on chapter 19 video, you'll see a video that basically shows Tom Robinson being questioned by both Atticus and Mr. Gilmer. And then there's a quiz, there's the summary that I just went over, and then there is this assignment, which I want to go over real quick. Is Mayella a victim? So instead of making you write like a paragraph about this, what I wanted you to do is just list a couple of reasons why Mayella could be viewed as a victim, and a few ways that you think she's not a victim. Maybe she's a villain or an antagonist. So like an easy thing you could put on here as well, like one reason she's a victim, her father abuses her. Like, it's pretty obvious he at least physically abuses her. And he neglects her. I mean, she has to take care of all of her siblings. She didn't get to go to school. He drinks up all the money they receive. So they're often going hungry. They never have shoes. You could write anything about her being in poverty under the pros. And then for the cons, well, I mean, she's lying to get Tom convicted. She is using Tom to kind of alleviate her own shame because she was caught trying to kiss him by her father. So she's blaming him for raping her, right? So she's blaming Tom for something she did or tried to do with him. So you could list that type of thing for the cons. Also, you could list how she speaks to Atticus, how racist her speech is, anything like that for the cons. Anything about her position and how miserable her life has been could go in the pros. So you should be able to figure out a bunch of those. If you have trouble with it, you can refer back to the chapter 18 summary, and there's like a lot of ways in which daddy problems. She has a very unfortunate father. There's a part where Atticus tries to get her to admit that she's lying, and she looks at her father first. So you kind of get the idea that she's so scared of him, there's no way in the courtroom she's going to be able to say that it was really him, not Tom, just out of fear, because she has to go home to him after the trial. Okay, if you guys got the packets already, the take-home packets, I did want to go over something there. The first part of your packet has papers that looks like this. It'll say like Monday, week 1, Tuesday, week 1, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I'm going to put the answer, instead of going over all this because we only have like 5 minutes left, I'm going to put this on the website. So it'll say week 1, and it will have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it will just be the answers. I went through these. It'll just tell you the answers. Sorry, I can't talk. It'll give you the answers to all of the first week. So I'll put that on there as soon as I'm done with this YouTube thing. I still want you to do the work yourself, but this will give you the answers so you can check your own work. So you get better at doing this. I think if you just do it, but you never find out if you did it correctly or not, it doesn't really do you a ton of good. So I'm going to put the answers up probably every Thursday for the previous week. So next Thursday I'll put up week 2. The following week I'll put up week 3, and so on and so on. And I couldn't do the work on the page and then scan it because I'm not at the school at the moment. So what I did was I just typed the answers into a Word document, and I'll post that on the website so that you have the correct answers. If you have any questions with that, why something is right or why something's wrong, you can just comment in Google Classroom, send me an email, or you can get a hold of me on the next YouTube live session, and I'll explain why something's right or wrong. All right. Any questions with that? I don't know how far you guys got on the packets. Are you going to be a YouTuber? Well, what I want to start doing is going over candles, like scented candles. I hear you can become a YouTuber by going over scented candles and make a lot of money doing that. I don't own any candles, but I hear that's the way you go about this. Either that or you like wear fancy clothes and comment on those. Not really sure. But any questions on the packet as a whole yet? I assume by now you guys got the packets. They're organized by week. Can minimize this and pull it up. I think it's in here, right? Nope. I don't know. I thought I had it out already. Let me pull that up. There we go. Okay, so your guys' packet schedule, you have the week 1, the Friday language arts practice. That's what I was just going over. So that is what I'll be giving you the answers to, and then next week I'll give you the answers to the next one, and so on. I'll probably stick the answers to the vocab on there as well for you. I'm not sure how far you guys have gotten on that. I know a lot of the 7th graders said they just got their packet. Okay, good. So, and again, like, I don't want you guys to get overwhelmed with all the Google Classroom stuff and all of the packet stuff. Just kind of work 20 minutes a day, and I'll be fine with that. So if you only get, say, like 3 or 4 weeks worth of the packet done, but you do the Google Classroom stuff, that's okay. I would just say finish week 1 before you move to week 2. Don't just kind of like do the quick and easy parts, but try to do an entire week before you move on. But okay. So if there aren't any questions on that, I will keep going. I know we only have a few minutes left. Okay, cool. All right. So the last thing on the Google Classrooms for this assignment is the quiz. I made it pretty short this chapter. I had to give you a few more short answer questions, mainly because a lot of them are opinion based. So like, why did Tom have to say Mayla was remembering things incorrectly rather than simply saying that she was lying? You could have a different interpretation of that than I do. Is Mayla a victim? Why or why not? Again, that's kind of up for your opinion. And then the themes, how does Dill crying at the end of the chapter help develop the theme of a loss of innocence? There are a couple of different ways that you could go with that question. So those ones aren't multiple choice. Most of the questions on the quizzes I've been making are multiple choice, but this one will take you just a little bit longer than the other ones. But yeah, so when you go to Google Classroom for this week, you have your quiz, you have the video you can watch if you want. It's basically just the chapter. You have that graphic organizer assignment, is Mayla a victim, why or why not? And then you have the summary there for you to do as well. So, any questions with that? Also, do you guys have any questions with the packet in general? Like, I tried to pick a range of stories, so if you think week 2's story is more interesting than week 1's story, or maybe you think the story for week 7 is more interesting, I'm okay if you want to jump around there and do the story for week 5 instead of the story for week 1, but I still want you to do all the components, right? So if you do the, don't just do the language arts component for all the weeks, but do the language arts component, the vocab, the story, the writing portion. But if you want to jump around the writing assignment for week 3, instead of the writing assignment for week 1, I'm okay with that. I know the first story is science fiction, mainly just because I like science fiction, but I think week 7 story is like a basketball story, so I think some people might find that more interesting. There's also a video game story, I believe, in there somewhere. Maybe that was with the 7th grade. You guys got the Steph Curry one, though. I know like a lot of people like basketball, so that's in there. Trouble with Television might be kind of interesting for you if you like science. There's the Making Tracks on Mars. There's something by Arnold Schwarzenegger. This one talks about phones, so like someone arguing about phones. So you might think that's kind of interesting. Who Can Replace Man is science fiction. It's about robots and stuff. So I just dig that type of stuff. So that's why that's on there. So let me know if you have any questions. Get a hold of me on Google Classrooms. I'll answer whatever questions you might have. If you have any other questions, you can always type it in here, or you can shoot me an email. But okay, you can cross it out and type that in. That is fine by me. All right, so I got Malachi, I got Brianna, and I got Elijah as being in here, so I'll make sure I give you guys credit for being here. Is there anybody else here that I need to mention? Okay. All right. Well, it is a little after 2:30, so I will take off. I'll be back next Tuesday, and we'll go over chapter 20. Hopefully, you are at least trying to keep up with the book. You're getting to the interesting part if you are. The trial's kind of like the big part of the book. So there's only, I think, one more chapter, maybe 2, that deal with the trial because all of the witnesses are done. I think you just have the closing statements and then the verdict to get through. After the trial's over, the story doesn't stop. It keeps going for a little bit because you get to see the aftermath. But you are pretty close to being done with the novel at this point. So talk to you later. Have a good day.